Welcome, traveler. My name is Winkari, and this is The Journey, a World of Warcraft podcast. A cozy stop along the road where we share stories, reflect on the world of Azeroth, and enjoy the game at our own pace. Pull up a chair, warm yourself by the fire, and let's begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first official episode of The Journey, a World of Warcraft podcast. My name is Winkari, and I couldn't be happier to be here with you. Before we begin, I want to let you know that this is going to be a little bit different than a typical episode. Just so you can have some context for me, what brought me to starting a podcast. I also want to talk about my background with video games, MMOs, and what's led me to WoW as the only game that I currently play. Then after that, I'll discuss how I play the game and what our gameplay and content rhythm is going to be in the future. So before we do that, I'm going to start out every single episode. I don't really have a intro for this yet. I plan to have it for our next episode, but I want to start each episode from a different location in Azeroth, and you, the listener, are going to hear some music and get a few clues from me, and then you get to kind of play the game and see if you can figure out where it is that I am recording from. So, without saying any more than that, I'll give you a few hints, shall we? There are some merchants nearby. I'll give you some names here. Janice Hammer Knuckle, Brother Daniel, Dermot Johns, and Godric Rothgar. A little bit more information. A weaponsmith, general supplies, cloth and leather armor merchant, and armorer and shield crafter. It's a luscious green with some stoned pathway leading away from what looks to be some sort of religious building, and a few more that'll probably give it away, but also close by there's a tent with some Stormwind army registrars sitting, waiting to talk with you. If I move closer to that building, there's a box of the male type, with a Stormwind Royal Guard circling Marshall McBride, and to his left, Millie Osworth. If you haven't already figured it out by now, this is where it all began for me, playing this game way back when in 2004. The very first character that I rolled was, I believe, a warlock named Kay. And that was a human here in Northshire, and that's exactly where we are. Northshire Abbey is the building I was referring to. It's basically the starting zone for humans if for some reason you live under a rock and you've never been there before. That's where we are to start our episode today. A little bit of background for me and video games. I've been playing since I was a young kid. I come from a big family and I've moved a lot. And the very first system that I was introduced to as a console was Atari. We had a friend across the street from us who owned one. I vaguely remember like Pong and a few other games. But my more specific memories as a child for video game consoles was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. My grandparents on my mom's side, for some reason, had one in their back room, and I have very fond memories playing with my brothers, playing Super Mario Brothers, Excite Bike, Duck Hunt, and a few other games like that. Moved on eventually to the Game Boy. I had the original gray one. I think I had the red one, Game Boy Color. Was a Pokemon Yellow Game Boy Color at one point. Also had a Sega Game Gear. Do you guys remember those? It was a lot of fun. I actually remember going on road trips, and if you can believe it, they actually had an extra add-on peripheral, which was basically a TV antenna that you put in the top of the Game Gear. And then you could watch TV. You could get local stations. So no joke, my family would use this and we'd watch TV on our Game Gear. How cool is that? Later we went the Sega route. My friends had the SNES, but my family went the Sega route. So I remember playing games. I think there was a game called Exile. I remember playing, obviously, Sonic, a few other games like that. We moved on to the N64. Amazing memories with that one. Again, I had friends that went the PlayStation route. We went the Nintendo route then. But, I mean, wow, I could list so many games. But, obviously, Mario, GoldenEye, Mario Kart, Diddy Kong Racing. Loved playing that. Quest 64. Anyone remember that one? After that, I did have an Xbox and a PS2 or 3. I don't remember which one I started with, and this would have been around high school for me. And I played lots of different games on the PS3, and over time, 4 and 5 briefly. But that's kind of my history with consoles specifically. But I do want to cover some of my favorite games that I've played throughout my life. I would say top 5. First is Pokemon. I was introduced to this going into high school, and I just fell hard for Pokemon. Love that game. I think the ones that I was really, really into were the original Red and Blue, Silver, Gold. But I'd say Pokemon, we'll just say Pokemon in general, but especially those first few, one of my favorite games of all time. Next, Might and Magic. Does anyone remember that? This is a PC game. An RPG, but specifically Might and Magic 6, 7, and 8. Those are my jam. Loved those, and if you remember, they were kind of those old school ones where you're just looking out and you're kind of seeing what your party sees, and you have little frames for your characters in the bottom, and when you attack, melee or spells, you just kind of hua, 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 or you'd shoot out spells. Very immersive game. Or I should say games, those 3 specifically. And then I remember I think it was around senior year of high school, Final Fantasy X and Baldur's Gate 2 were my jam, let me tell you. Final Fantasy X, I hadn't really played the Final Fantasy series until 10, to be perfectly honest, and I absolutely loved the adventure of that game. It's the only game I can recall that I actually had tears as the credits rolled. I remember this specifically. And then Baldur's Gate 2, also just this sweeping, epic, adventurous journey where you have a party and there's so many ups and downs, and the story is so gripping and immersive. Just loved that game to death. So many hours put into that one. And then lastly, my 5th favorite video game of all time would be Elder Scrolls Morrowind. I played this one in college, and again, just the memories of launching out in this vast open world. I remember the sky being just gorgeous, especially when it's nighttime, and seeing the planets and the moons and the stars. Getting to Balmora, that first city. Those are probably, I'd say, my favorite video games of all time. Little background for me. My relationship to video games as a hobby specifically is something that I could do more as a kid. This isn't unique to me, but something I did a lot growing up. But I'd have to say, once I graduated college, I had way less time, way less money, particularly for myself. My undergrad was actually in acting, so very specific, busy, crazy profession, and video games as a hobby kind of went to the wayside. I couldn't really quite stick with consoles specifically due to time and money, but what I found was that PCs made a little more sense to me, because you kind of need one anyway, and then you can play games on it as well. I have tried consoles a little bit since then over the years, off and on, but to be honest, they've never really stuck with me. I've always had kind of buyer's remorse after I get a console. And to be honest, eventually I just ended up selling them. Not too long after I bought them. So why MMOs instead of what I'll say is a regular game? For me, there's many reasons for this. First and foremost, MMOs provide a persistent world, story, and character progression that I just don't get from other games. I love that my story is always continuing, right? We're called The Journey as a podcast, right? I love that that journey is always continuing. I love that it provides an escape, right? There's this escapism to a world that isn't my own in MMOs. I like playing a game that is inhabited by other players. It also makes it more immersive. MMOs immerse me more than any other type of game. I also love that I can dip in and out whenever I want. I can play for 10 minutes or 3 hours. It's that type of flexibility that isn't necessarily found in other games. It kind of scratches the itch, so to speak. I also love that in an MMO, it seems to be a little more meaningful to me knowing that the game never ends. You see, what I find is that when I play other games, I can't help shake this feeling that I should be playing WoW instead, because that game eventually comes to an end. There's a close. But WoW, I know it doesn't. And last but not least, I'm going to say a practical reason. I do love that I don't have to keep buying consoles to kind of keep up with the gaming market. I just need a PC. And you usually need a PC anyway, so like I said earlier, it works out very well for me. So, what MMOs led me here? I've been through quite a few, but my first was Final Fantasy XI. I first tried this one in college. I remember getting a very rare item really early on in that game that sold for tons on the auction house. And I remember how cool it felt that I had something like that so early in the game. But I could never really stay with that game. I remember because of college being so busy, I remember money was tight, and I also remember the game feeling very grindy. So, to be perfectly honest, I don't have huge, vast, exhaustive memories of that game. I never really went back to it later because there was so much content that over time I felt that I could never really catch up if I tried. So, it's kind of skewed, but if I had to give a grade to my experience in Final Fantasy XI, I'd give it a C. Next is World of Warcraft. I was in the original beta in 2004, and I fell in love from the beginning. But, like I said earlier, I've played off and on for months and years, sometimes with huge gaps. In one gap, I remember moving on to Guild Wars 1. I remember being told about this game right when Guild Wars 2 was announced as an upcoming game, so I thought, hey, I'll check this one out first. So I tried it, and I loved the starting zone of Guild Wars 1. It really did a great job of bringing you in this kind of high fantasy storybook world. And what was really cool about that starting zone was that all of the events happened before the game actually begins. So you play that whole starting area and then you jump way in time, which I thought was just so cool and a really bold choice by the game developers. I must say I loved the story. It did feel kind of like a single-player RPG, but kind of online. But it really did feel like a storied adventure. If I gave that game a grade, I'd give it a B. Next was Guild Wars 2. Man, was this a big deal when it came out. I was literally obsessed with this game. I remember listening to many podcasts at the time, following many YouTube personalities like Bog Otter and Aurora Peachy. And I remember this game officially launched right before I actually enlisted in the army. Kind of crappy timing, right? I remember being in basic training, no joke, and religiously talking about this game with others. When I was done, I remember taking my army money, so to speak, and I bought a Sega gaming laptop, and I started playing the game in my barracks at my advanced individual training. I played that game nonstop for the first 2 years, and I found that, unfortunately, my interest slowly waned going into the second expansion. Here's some things I loved about Guild Wars 2. I think it has the best art design of any MMO that I've ever played. I love that it is buy to play, no subscription. I loved the great high fantasy setting. I really enjoyed that your items and currencies were shared across characters, extremely convenient. They also have the best cities of any MMO. If you go into the cities in that game, they really feel inhabited, they felt lived in and alive. I really liked the unique classes, the stories that they bring, and also, of any MMO I've played, the best UI. Their interface is just top tier, super good. Speaking of other great things, their interactive world map is the best I've ever seen. It's epic, it's beautiful, you can zoom in and zoom out. It's like you're interacting with one of those story maps at the beginning of a fantasy novel, but you can actually interact with it. Just love that map. I really love their dynamic events. You'd go and do something, and then if you passed it or failed it, it would affect kind of the world around you, and some of these had like multiple kind of iterations or things they would turn into. I thought that was really well done. I really liked that there was a main story quest at all times when you were playing that game that you could be tracking, so you always kind of had this through line that was bringing you through the game. And finally, I really enjoyed that the combat felt fluid in that game, but I will say that it definitely, at least when I played, it felt like it kind of favored ranged classes. A few things I didn't like. I didn't like that the weapons swapping is what changed abilities. At first, I liked that you did activities near a heart to fill it up, but then after a while, I really felt that this felt like a task to be completed rather than questing, which is what I ultimately prefer. They had really cool dungeons at first, but they eventually just abandoned those outright, which I did not like. Overall, I really felt the game always seemed like it was caught between resisting being like WoW, but yet wanting to eventually add WoW-like things like raids and flying and more Holy Trinity type roles. I didn't like that the level cap was 80 and was never raised. That kind of got rid of progression and replaced it really with abilities and transmogs, which for me wasn't really enough. The game really started to lose me towards the end of the second expansion, like I said earlier, the Path of Fire. People just seemed to be abandoning the game more and more at that time, and it felt more, to me, like a single-player game. But that being said, really great experience. I would give Guild Wars 2 a B+. It's deserving of that grade. Next is WildStar. I did play this game at launch. I was really excited at first, but the game really never took off. I don't really remember specifically why. I do remember there was this class or ability that let you access hidden areas that no other class could do, which created that kind of fear of missing out if you didn't pick it, which I thought was a little odd. But again, the game died pretty quickly, so I can't really give it much more than that other than to say C-. We'll go with that. Next is Final Fantasy XIV. I tried this game for the first time a few years ago. I've tried it multiple times since then, but I've never been able to get to the first expansion. I found that I was stuck at the epilogue questing of the main game, A Realm Reborn, and there was just too much filler, and that's kind of where I left it. It took some getting used to, but overall a very good game. I loved that there was a day-night cycle that felt very immersive. I loved the weather effects. I loved that you had one character that could do all the classes. I love that they have Triple Triad, the card game that you could play all over the world. I think their dungeons, their raids, their trials are probably some of the best of any MMO in my book. Really just excellent design and boss battles. I love the telegraphs that they have when you're fighting. It's really easy to kind of understand and learn the mechanics of the boss fights because it's just so clear. I also really liked the hunting log. I loved that achievements often gave items and mounts. I liked that there wasn't many wasted abilities on action bars. There was a nice flow to them. I really enjoyed the beautiful mount and monster designs of that game. And finally, the fan base, really just top tier. Top tier fan base for Final Fantasy XIV. A few things I didn't like. The pacing, numero uno, I think is what really killed it for me. The pacing of that game, in my opinion, is pretty darn bad. I found that there was way too much dialogue compared to the action. And this dialogue, not much of it was voiced, so you have these huge text boxes, and not enough voice acting. And then the voice acting that they did have was often hit or miss, and not really used consistently with different characters and situations. Sometimes you'd go into voice acting when you're not expecting it, and vice versa. Part of that bad pacing also was that there was way too many fetch quests. You're backtracking left and right, and I just didn't like that you'd complete a quest, and when you're done, run back to the other person, finish it, run back to the other person. Then when you actually finish that quest, they have this thing where you complete it, and then you have to click back on them to initiate the next quest, which I just thought was super tedious, you know? The combat itself in the game felt really more wooden, slower than what I'd say I like, really less immediate, like when you're pushing your buttons compared to something like WoW. I also didn't like that they have instanced zones instead of just being able to kind of free flow, travel between most zones and cities. Kind of killed immersion for me every time you'd have to instance in and out of areas. Another part I didn't really care for was the UI. If you play this game, it's archaic. We'll just say that UI is in dire need of a facelift. Also, the auction house, or I guess they call it the retainer system, never really made sense to me. It was very convoluted, really unintuitive. You have to hire a retainer, tell them the things you want to do or not to, and I just don't think you need a middleman, right? Just let us play the game. The housing system itself was really cool at first, but then I found that it was really hard to get into, right? Everyone would snatch up these houses and kind of have a lock on the market, and you can't really break in unless you have a bajillion dollars. Overall, the game really seems, in my mind, geared more towards a grinding mentality, or for people that really like the grind, or maybe are hardcore Final Fantasy players. But unfortunately, both of those, I am not. So, overall, I would give Final Fantasy XIV a grade of a B. Next is New World. This game was gifted to me when it first released. Really kind of novel fun at first, but quickly faded for me. I didn't really like the aiming, action, fighting mechanics. I didn't like the grindy nature of crafting, professions. And to be honest, the story never grabbed me. I'm not really a fan of zombie stuff, and I played for maybe a few weeks, and then I was out. So my grade for that, again, playing minimal, I'll give a C-. Next is SWTOR, Star Wars The Old Republic. Pretty great game. I tried it a few years ago. It was really cool at first, but eventually felt like a single-player game in the Star Wars universe. I tried it again about a year ago and really got into it, but eventually just felt like a single-player game again, and I really wanted to feel like I was playing in a world with others playing the game around me, which is not what that ever felt like to me. The remaining players that I saw in that game were, I'm assuming, just hardcore Star Wars fans at the end of the day, and I just don't think that's enough to really sustain a world that feels lived in and inhabited. I will say, though, I loved the voiceovers, amazing voice acting for that game. I did also enjoy the setting, the lore. I'm a big fan of Star Wars myself, so seeing lots of references, reference points, having watched the shows and movies, etc., was great for me. And I could see myself really enjoying the game if it actually were popular again, but I don't think, unfortunately, that will ever happen. So for me, SWTOR gets a B. Finally, that leaves us with WoW. At the end of the day, WoW to me is my game because it simply does more things consistently above average. It's not the best at certain things, but has very few weaknesses in my book. I love that World of Warcraft has a high fantasy setting. I love that there's a familiarity to it that I can always come back to. And overall, I think it has the best pacing and ratio between story and gameplay action. I like that there are so many ways you can play the game, and you can always rotate to something different if you get bored. At the end of the day, WoW has always been the one that I come back to because it feels like home. There's a familiarity, a comfortability that no other MMO has for me. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have weaknesses and areas of improvements, which are definitely some things that we'll talk about over time. But overall, as it stands, I would give World of Warcraft an A-. So what's my history and preferences with this game? Well, my first ever character, which I think I talked about earlier, was a warlock named Kay. I remember being in awe of the open world setting, and I remember smiling, grinning ear to ear when I got on that first Griffin ride from Westfall to Stormwind. Historically, I have been an altaholic. I will be the first to admit it. Not because I can't sit still, but because I've always had difficulty sticking with one class. As it stands today, I have 54 characters on 14 servers, but I'm sure half of those are like level 5 characters, so just get some context for that one. Historically, there's really only 3 or 4 classes that I've really been drawn to, and that is the rogue, the mage, the paladin, and the hunter. I find that overall, I prefer range and mobility, and usually living longer as a bonus. And hunters really give me the most versatile experience with not too many buttons that I have to smash, kind of with a simple rotation, but just enough complexity that keeps me engaged. One thing I will say as a caveat, though, is that pet management, not really my favorite thing. As it relates to Alliance versus Horde, I have never been able to shake the feeling that the Horde are the bad guys. And before you at me, I know that's not the case necessarily. I've just never been able to shake it, and I always like playing the good guys, so Alliance is what I almost always end up playing. But I will say beyond that, though, I do prefer the Alliance zones, the Alliance capital cities, and the Alliance races by and large as well. My favorite races to play would definitely be Night Elf and Human. Those are probably the 2 that I go to more than anything else. In regards to PvE versus PvP, I don't really do PvP. I'd like to dabble more into it eventually, but I'm mostly a PvE guy, just so you guys know. That's probably what you're going to hear a lot more about in our podcast. My history of playing the game specifically, like I said, is that I started out in vanilla and then into Burning Crusade, but then I kind of fizzled out. I don't remember what the reasoning was at that time, and since then I've basically dipped in and out of various expansions, never really finishing any of them. So as it relates to our podcast starting out, I most recently came back when Dragonflight came out and played that through, and then now War Within. So I've completed those 2, and now what I've done is I've gone back to say I want to go back and experience all these expansions in chronological order the best that I can, trying to recreate the original experience. So what that means is I went back and finished Wrath of the Lich King, and then more recently have started with Cataclysm. So what I do is I go through all the zones, all the dungeons, all the raids, and if I can't find people to do that group content, then I'll just take one of my max level characters, my Pally or my Hunter, and then I solo them. So what that means is I have this extra character that I will lock at, I think, 70, something like that, where you can lock your experience progression. And that way I can play all these expansions over time and have them be challenging to my level and not just one-shotting everything that I go through. And then as I'm playing, I use Wowhead and ChatGPT. Those are kind of like my two guides that help me play through them chronologically, find the lore info, rare encounters, drops, etc. along the way. So, this is going to be the current gameplay rhythm moving forward for the podcast. I'll play anything that is current endgame, and then whenever there's dry spells, as we know does happen, I'll continue my journey chronologically through old expansions. So, this is not a normal episode. I want to make that very clear. Think of this as episode 0.5, even though it's technically episode 1. Our next episode will be more of what to expect. This one's obviously been quite meandering. Yes, we're in Azeroth logistically, but I've been talking about things all over the place. Other types of games, MMOs, a little bit about me. So I want you to know what's going on for our next episode. I will be discussing old vanilla content, War Within Delves, Cataclysm Beginnings, Brewfest, and Hallow's End. That's what you have to look forward to moving forward. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Solo Q podcast for inspiring me to start the journey. Dave Gagne's podcast showed me that there is a space for other players like myself, and hopefully you, the listener. Do yourself a favor, go check him out if you haven't already done so. That is the Solo Q podcast. And with that, our time together comes to a close. If you like what you hear and you'd like to keep traveling with me, be sure to follow The Journey wherever you listen. And if you write a review, I'll even read it on the show. You can also find me on Twitter and YouTube at The Journey WoW Pod. And if you want to provide any feedback or ask a question for me to answer on air, you can email me at thejourneywowpod@gmail.com. Special thanks to Blizzard for our in-game music and to you for listening. I'll see you next time when the journey continues.